Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see so many people out here again today, and it's cool in here. It's much nicer here than it is outside any place. It's miserably hot and humid. My name is Judy Jeffers. I think most of you know that by now. I am a volunteer here at the museum, and one of my duties is to introduce our presenter every second Saturday. The first thing I will do is remind you, please turn off your cell phones. Everybody has them off already. Okay, good. Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce Stephen Kent. Stephen is our board president, and he has just a few words to say to you.
And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my cell phone. Since she reminded me too oftentimes I don't do that, and I get kind of caught, you know. Except with modern cell phones, you may have this problem too. You turn the ringer down all the way, then your alarm goes off full blast. You know, it's like, I finally figured out that there are 3 settings on my phone, and you have to go and turn them all off individually and turn them back on again. So anyway, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see you here today. And most of you, let's see, you had masks if anybody's been here. Anybody for the first time? Everybody's been here before?
I don't think so. I recognize pretty much everybody.
That's all right. That's good then. So we got a regular crowd. You've probably heard me say this before then, but I always have to mention it, that the funding for this organization and the reason we can do these free programs is because we're under contract to the county, which handles many of the expenses that we have. At the same time, I encourage you, if you're not a member, or if you don't know you're a member, we would like for you to join the organization, because the more members we have, the better we're doing when we go for grants and things of that nature. And grants are a very important part of this and other fundraising activities to bring you the programs that we bring you all the time. So anyway, that's about all I have to say this time. She says it's cool in here. I'm sweating. But Ron says he turned the air down just a little while ago, so it will cool down. And eventually we'll all be shivering. So
try not to breathe heavily.
There you go. Don't breathe heavily. So
keep it down.
There you go, dear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I forget, this is a good day. This is National Left-Handers Day. How many of you are left-handed? Well, congratulations. This is your day. I think that's wonderful. I never knew there was. Oh, Steve is. I know he is. I watch him in meetings. He doodles. Okay, a couple other commercials here before we get going. We have our new 3-month, the final 3 months of the season cards. I can't do this with this. You can get one of these. Thank you, Ron. Show and tell. Okay, you can
hold the mic up here.
Okay. Oh, you all right? All right.
Hold the mic up here.
This is for September, October, and November.
Take your mic. There you
September,
go.
October, November. September is Wicked Bay City. Tim Yonkman is going to do a presentation, and he has written a book. And if you have not read the book or have not obtained a copy of the book, you should do so soon, because it's a wonderful, wonderful read. October 8th is Dams on the Osable River with Jay Jacobs. I'm not familiar with him. He's a public affairs director for Consumers Energy. He'll have actual photos from the construction of several dams along the Osable River. So be sure and be here for that one. And November 12th is the Bay Chorale with chorale members, and they're very entertaining. I believe, no, we had the band once. Okay, you can set that down, thank you.
You're welcome.
And the same flyer that Ron just read from is available in the lobby, so be sure and pick one up.
Will
yes,
the November one be here?
Is what, in November?
Yes,
we'll be here in November. We'll be here for all 3 of the final concerts. The only one that we're never not here is March, and we're at the planetarium because of Michigan History Day. Okay, now the reason that I'm here to introduce our presenter, Laura Ogar. Laura has over 25 years experience working in the environmental resource management field in Alaska and Michigan. Previously working for both the public and private sectors on complex land use permitting for oil and gas industry, water quality management for municipalities, and compliance with environmental regulations. That's a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's fine. That's a long one.
And I got it out. Since 2001, Laura has served as the Director of Bay County Environmental Affairs and Community Development, and is a proud Great Lakes Bay Regional Ambassador, class of 2008. She has, Laura now participates in many community organizations and has been a founding participant in the EPA Superfund Dow Dioxin Citizens Advisory Group to ensure the Bay is not forgotten in the evolving cleanup as it moves downstream from the Tittabawassee River. She is a graduate of Ferris State University. She has a bachelor's degree in science in environmental health and resource management. And with that, I give you Laura Ogar. Enjoy the presentation, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me back there? Okay, good. I appreciate Stephen's comment about being a member. I've not attended a second Saturday, but I have been a member of the Historical Society for a number of years. So just so you know, I'm part of that. But today I wanted to talk about, the subject of the presentation today is restoring access to the Saginaw Bay. And I'm going to kind of go over a little bit of some brief history, and many of you may be more familiar with some of the sites and some of the photos I'm going to show you. But then talk about some of the activities that the community is currently working on to increase and restore access to the Saginaw Bay. And then lastly, I know you're here to receive information, but you're also, I have a homework assignment for all of you. So I will talk about that before anybody leaves. You're going to hear the homework assignment. So, with that, one of the things I want to point out, because as I was introduced, I am relatively new to the Bay County area from 2001. I guess that's not new anymore, but I don't have a long-term, my family hasn't been from this area, and one of the things that I learned early on when I started doing a lot of the research into the shoreline area and some of the historical water quality problems in the Bay is that many organizations for a long, long time have been working on Bay improvements. Tim, I know you've covered stories about those over the years. And so I want to certainly give deference to many of you probably have worked on these items. And so I'm certainly not presenting myself as an expert. I'm giving you a snapshot in time of where we're at. Certainly some of the the Saginaw Bay fishing, what we've learned, even looking at some of these older reports, this is I don't know if you can see that back there, but the Saginaw Bay is actually two parts before it goes into Lake Huron. There's the inner Saginaw Bay, this lower part, and that's where we are here where the Saginaw River and the Bay County area is. This inner Saginaw Bay is about 130 miles shoreline, and then there is this outer Saginaw Bay, Tawas. Even our new water intake is up in Alabaster. Have you heard, oftentimes they say that new water intake is in Lake Huron. Well, not technically, it's not. It's still getting refreshing current from Lake Huron, but it's still technically in the outer Saginaw Bay that goes from an area from the point of the thumb to above, beyond, just north of Tawas. So, but some of the early studies for fishing access in this inner Saginaw Bay, 130 miles. Any fishermen in here, fisher people? Where do you go to fish in the bay? Unless you have a boat, no, you're not fishing in the bay. You can fish offshore on the river, and that's nice. We've been actually seeing more of that in the last few years, but there's not a lot of fishing access. Boat launch locations, I think there were some boat launches that were actually constructed in the late 90s and the early 2000 time period. Visual access around the bay, who knew, right? When we talk about access to the bay, I'm thinking, sand beach or some type of open area. In 130 miles, again, of this shoreline, there are very few spots you can actually go to see the bay. especially when we talk about, you know, the Phragmites, those invasive weeds that started moving in and got so tall, creating almost like a wall, a barrier around the shoreline. So anyway, emergency response was having issues trying to access during the winter time, ice fishermen on the bay from an accident up in this western portion of the bay shore because of the Phragmites. Snow machine trail riding, you can get out onto the bay, but again, very few access points. So, and then what I found fascinating, it was only after working with Ron, is realizing how much this beachfront, this western shoreline from the Bay City north, like Bay City moving up into Tobaco Creek, up to the Bay City State Rec area, Linwood area, as well as some of this shoreline area in the Hampton Township zone, had actually been resort areas. How many of you knew that? I mean, did most? Because this was actually, you know, again, when, you know, working with some of the agencies, I kept hearing about Saginaw Bay having this vast coastal wetland marsh complex, which was it was interesting. But who knew? The Oatka Beach Resort in Cucaulin, do you know where that was? At the mouth of the Cucaulin River. It's now privately owned. It's been, you know, the hotel's been torn down, and there's some private residents. But that was right on the at the mouth of the Cucaulin River on that south side. Reservation Beach. Look at these dates. 1874. That was just south of where the pump stations are now. So that's on the Saginaw Bay. Wenona Beach Amusement Park. You've all heard of that, and there's a beautiful display in the basement. I don't know if you've all seen that, but it's a phenomenal display. The casino, the pier, docking facilities, 1887. And it's interesting because this pier had been out there for quite a period of time, 70 or 80 years. It was damaged by ice in 1947, and it was not rebuilt. Now, but keep in mind, it had been out there. You've seen the postcards, the copies of the postcards. Paraleon Pier. There was another pier out there. Paraleon Pier. It was also known as Waterworks Park. There's a dance hall pier. The other thing I would add, Paraleon Pier and this beach was also a small amusement park. I don't know if you remember the Billboard magazine and some of these magazines that would talk about some of the music and some of the musicians that were traveling in different areas. They also had a section on amusement parks that would talk about, and Wenona Beach was listed. They had the roller coaster, Ferris wheel, okay, Jackrabbit. So there was also a Ferris wheel at Paraleon Pier.
Where was that located?
Paraleon Pier, and I'm going to have more photos on this one, but this was at the foot of State Park Drive, and I will have photos. This is kind of an overview, a listing of the significant number of resorts that have been on our shoreline area. Boca Tondon Beach Resort, that was a resort that's actually took up most of where the Bay City State Rec area is now. Small cottages. Most of these were public or corporate owned by the railroad companies or the electric traction cars. Some of them by the railroad. Tobaco and the lumbering companies as well. Tobaco Beach Hotel and then Cottage Grove Summer Resort, which is still the name of that subdivision out there. They don't call it, well, you'll see Cottage Grove out there, but in the Linwood area. So this is it was important to, and quite a discovery, quite honestly. I named this the Saginaw Bay Swim Team because that's the only possible title this could have had. Ron Bloomfield, thank you, Ron, has actually, he discovered this photograph, and he's been very, very helpful, instrumental in a lot of the background research as well as some of these photos. But if you look at this is the Saginaw Bay. First of all, do you know what you realize, right, that those are bathing suits? And I don't know if you realize that, you may, but they're wool. So, and they would be rented. Every once in a while when a news article comes out about something that we're doing, working for on the bay, I will get a call or someone will come into my office with old photos or a story, or and this one gal from Saginaw called me, and she said that, and she had photos of the wool bathing suits that were rented out there, that they would rent. They would come, mother and father would drive her and her brother to the beach on the weekends, and they would rent bathing suits and swim. But look at this pier, right? That's a boat, nice pavilion out there. And it's just something to see, because it's just, have you been out at the shoreline recently along the Saginaw Bay? Because there's nothing like this now. There's nothing like this now. This is the old Wenona Beach Amusement Park. This is, the dock, and again, the boathouse that went out, the Joy Wheel that was out there. So anyway, Donahue Beach, that still exists. But you can see this traction car, this electric car that would take people out there. This was even before Patterson Road was built. So this is a photo. This was one of those rare photos that is not part of the the Wenona Beach. We see a lot of the Wenona Beach postcards, but this is the Paraleon Beach. This is, you can see the Paraleon Beach. The dining room, it says Frankenmuth style chicken dinners. I think they're like $1.25 each. But these posts, and again, Paraleon Beach is at the end of State Park Drive. Could anybody guess what this structure was? This was the old water pump station, the drinking water pump station. This was when, originally in Bay City, they were taking water out of the river. Obviously, there were sicknesses. This is back in the 1840s and 50s when they started to look at expanding for cleaner water. West Bay City, which was known, put in a pump station to draw water out of the bay in about the 1870 time period. And the old building out there now, the 1922 building that exists when you're traveling down State Park Drive, that last brick building on your right, that has a cornerstone, you can see it, 1922 building. That building replaced this. And when this building was no longer being used as a water pump station, they turned it into a dance hall and cafe.
I know.
Right, good use, right? And that is a Ferris wheel in the background. This is one of the last photos of the Paraleon Beach Park, again, at the foot of State Park Drive, just beyond, right if you were to do State Park Drive extended to the bay. This is what it looked like. You can see the playground. In fact, Art Dorr, I've talked to him, he told me he ended up with the contract to demolish this area, but you could see the playground. You could see, what's this? These are automobiles actually on the beach. Oh my gosh. And people in the water. So this is one of the last photos from that area. But when we talk, and I will say public access, we had talked, it's not just the county that had been concerned about public access along the shoreline around the Saginaw Bay. The Community Foundation, the Chamber of Commerce has been concerned. You've heard about the emergency response people trying to access the bay, fisher people. Even folks in the city of Bay City had been interested in how do we capitalize both our city and create some linkages to the bay. So when we talked about public access and increasing public access, this was a broad regional effort. People from Aranac County, Saginaw or Bay County, Tuscola, Huron County, so the cities within this area, the Saginaw, kind of started working together, forming the Saginaw Bay Coastal Initiative on these shared problems that we had in common. We found that instead of working in isolation, we had a much stronger voice, we had a much easier way if we worked collaboratively. So, and the top priority, based on public input, based on a standing room only crowd at the DoubleTree in 2006, said public access was the #1 challenge that we wanted to increase around the Saginaw Bay. And you've probably, kayaking has become very popular, as well as then, at the same time, the water quality in the bay has improved dramatically over the last 30 years. This was nationally designated as an impaired zone, and while it still has some impairments that we are working on, the water quality has greatly improved in the bay. People are now interested in, and I would add, this is a perfect place for me to pitch this. We all have heard of the combined sewage overflows, right? The CSOs, every time it rains in Saginaw, 12 million gallons of sewage comes through Bay City, right? Those were reports that had to be reported to the media in order to give the downstream people a heads up that, because this sewage early in the 1950s and 60s was coming your way, because there was a potential health risk, public health risk. Well, I have to tell you, that was one of the first things I started looking at, because it was just appalling to see these media reports about these combined sewage overflows into the river. And Saginaw Bay Coastal Initiative formed a committee and started looking at these things. And what we found is in the city of Bay City and the city of Saginaw, within the 22 miles of the Saginaw River, Saginaw River is only 22 miles long. These two main cities, what they started building, of course, with some encouragement, right, from the state regulators, DEQ, back in the 1960s and 1970s, were retention treatment basins that would then capture some of this storm surge from the wastewater treatment plants, and instead of going right into the river, it would collect that wastewater and treat it. It is allowed to settle, and it's chlorinated, and it's sampled before it's discharged into the river, even during these storm events. They started peeling off some of the areas that contributed to these the flow into this. Do you remember the slip lining project that the city of Bay City started doing 10 years ago? The lining that kept the water out of those pipes. It kept those pipes intact. And so what we found in this during this work group, when we looked at the actual data, we did not want to look at the summary reports. We wanted to see the actual sampling data from this discharge that was going into the Saginaw Bay, or the Saginaw River. And between the city of Bay City and the city of Saginaw, that water is no longer sewage. It is treated, and when you've heard it now called partially treated, it is only because the phosphorus has not been removed. But it is fully treated for bacteria. And quite honestly, the water that they're putting into the river during those random events, during storm events, is actually cleaner than the river quality when it goes in. So they are treating for bacteria. So that huge sewage issue is no longer, and has been no longer, a reality. You'll hear retention treatment basins. They're still required to report those because the law is on the books. It's still, and we're working to actually remedy that, because since there is no public health threat from those events, we want to, that law should, the media reporting should no longer apply. Yeah, Ron?
I just question, you talking about Bay City and Saginaw, what about Flint and Chesapeake
Yeah,
and
I
all
know.
those places?
That's always the next logical question. And I will say, we have not addressed that, but I will say, we took the approach, we wanted to make sure our own house was in order first before we started looking upstream. But this was a huge, huge, significant investment, public investment. I live in the city, I pay my sewer rates, and I proudly pay those sewer rates. And quite honestly, I'm thrilled that the level of protection, because quite honestly, it meets, there's almost zero bacteria in it. It meets, again, it's cleaner than the regular river water that you see out there in the Saginaw River, which is always going to have natural some bacteria in it. So anyway, the river and the water quality in the bay has improved significantly. You heard the dioxin, some of the contaminated sediments have been removed from the river. So people wanted to start looking at how do we actually get into this bay and how do we use it? And so we started looking at developing a Blueways trail, which is a coastal kayaking trail. The thumb had a kayaking trail, and then this northeast area of Michigan had a trail, so we wanted to fill the gap in the Saginaw Bay. When we started looking at what are those access points for someone who wanted to take a kayak or a canoe or even just be able to walk down and see the bay, what we started finding, we had to go out and we had to actually go to these road-ons. I did that when I first accepted this position. I was going to be working in Bay County. I wanted to see the bay. I ended up looking at these roads. I ended up over here at Consumers somehow in a gatehouse, and you couldn't get in there. So we came back over to the state park. But what we found when we did this inventory of access points is that, and this was actually in draft, these numbers have been verified, and they've actually in 130 miles of the inner Saginaw Bay area, 48 miles of the shoreline are preserved as they're publicly owned lands, but they're preserved for wildlife, habitat, birds, and it's a wildlife area. They're called designated wildlife areas, and that is this wildfowl bay, this green and brown area through here, olive through here, Fish Point wildlife area. It's got 12 miles of shoreline. Quantico, you've heard of Quantico down here at the river area going into Hampton Township, 5 miles. This is the Tobacco Marsh area. Now there's that thin strip of privately owned homes, but again, it's part of the shoreline or the Tobacco exists for wildlife. Nyanquin Point has 4 miles of shoreline, and then you go through here, and these are isolated parcels, and then Wigwam Bay. So what we found is, well, there's lots and lots of publicly owned property around the shoreline. This number went up from 37%, we found it's actually 48%. 48% of the 130 miles of coastal shoreline through this Saginaw Bay is preserved for wildlife and habitat, ducks, that type of thing. These are also hunting areas. But you cannot just walk through there. If you're not a hunter, you can't just walk through there. So, we realized what we really weren't talking about restoring public access, because there's publicly owned parcels. We were talking about restoring human access to the Saginaw Bay. And really, in this area and the 130 miles, there are 2 real spots: the 1,200 feet at the Bay City State Rec area, and 475 feet at Bay County Park in Pinconning. One of these are Phragmites. Do you know how tall these can grow generally? The experts in the books, some of the resource books will say 12 to 13 feet. We've had them in the Linwood area, like 15 to 16 feet tall. They're extremely tall.
I cut one out at the lighthouse property that was over 15 feet tall.
Okay, did you hear that? It's over 15 feet tall at the lighthouse property on the river. They are invasive plants, which means they are very aggressive, they're fast growing. You can see how dense they are. When they move into an area, they block out all other native vegetation. And in fact, this isn't even good habitat for deer. Deer trying to get through this. It will grow not just on land, but it'll grow into the water. Fish cannot swim through, like if you envision the cattails in a marsh where fish can go or hide in that area, like for habitat. That doesn't happen in here because of the nature of their the root system and how dense this is. So Phragmites was a major problem as far as access. Bay County and our partners, we've been doing some Phragmites treatment over the last several years, starting along this western shore and moving down. I have to tell you, there's been a lot of success. This is actually a national demonstration project in around the Saginaw Bay dealing with these Phragmites. So, and we are now moving into this eastern area along Hampton Township. We did receive a grant. It's about $340,000 grant. We were working with the tribe, Saginaw Chippewa tribe, Consumers Energy, Tuscola County Economic Development Corporation. And it's interesting, the Economic Development Corporation, right? Because, I mean, how many of you live on the bay? Right? Not very many. And so for those of us, other than Ron, who don't live on the bay, it's important to understand that this work on this Phragmites is not just being done for these shoreline property owners. This work is being done because these Phragmites is like living next to the back of a Walmart. It's a wall. You can't see through these dense areas of Phragmites. This, again, emergency response. We did have accident and response was delayed and there was a fatality. So it's habitat. Certainly, it's increasing the view around the bay, but it also adds to our whole economic prosperity. When just like when these CSOs were being reported in the newspapers, right? Detroit media was picking those up. Bay City, Saginaw is having another CSO. How many of you would want to come visit a place like that, right? Vacation and put your boat in that area. So it harms our economy, it harms our goodwill and reputation statewide. And so these improvements and these efforts have led towards a greater enhancement for all of us, even those who don't live on the bay. Beach maintenance is an area you've all heard about. Ernie Krieger, Commissioner Krieger and Commissioner Coonan that have kind of led this charge. They've done a lot of work and they've actually been successful, and they're the reasons why we have the 1,200 feet that we have at State Park. And it's important, I don't know, I vacationed down in Sanibel Island probably, 12 years ago, and I woke up to like this beeping, beep, 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 very early in the morning. I'm like, what is that? I was on the beach, staying on the beach, and it was road graders. Now this is State Park. This is the State Park beach, right? If any of you haven't been out there lately, this is what it is. And this is what it looks like, and boats out there, swimming markers. But on Sanibel Island, right, an island is famous for the shells, there was a road grader coming in early in the morning, 5 o'clock, in fact it was every morning, and dropping his blade and just skimming off the shell and all of the algae, all of that plant material that had washed up overnight, and they stockpile it and they haul it away. But this happens. I just talked to a friend who spent a weekend over on the west side of Michigan, Muskegon State Park. Beach grooming is sand sifting. It's just pulling the trash, the dead fish, the algae from the beach into this sand sifter, and the rest of the sand just falls through and it's clean. Cigarette butts, all that stuff. So it happens on every public beach from here to Florida. And I bring that up because when we talk about access, the Bay City State Rec area is our primary point of access. I don't know, you've probably heard about the Saginaw, Midland, Bay communities rebranding ourselves as the Great Lakes Bay region. That's the region, right? The Saginaw Bay. That's what you can see from NOAA satellites. It's a geographic feature that is distinguishable. But this is the extent of our access, the Bay City State Rec area down here at the end of State Park Drive. This is when it swings through the park. This is the city-owned pump station, the 1922 building. That is, and our city manager is here. I don't know if you know that Rick Finn is here. He's been very supportive on exploring ways to help increase access out here. This is now recently been decommissioned with our new intake, but this is a privately owned building, but also formerly related to the water system. This parcel is the parcel we're looking at to be putting in the pier. If we can work with DNR, and we have gotten them to agree conditionally, if we do a number of steps, they will agree that we can put a pier in here and possibly work with the city to possibly repurpose this pump station for shops, a kite shop, bait shop, ice cream shop. Why not, right? I mean, west side of Michigan has it. So anyway, this is our shoreline area. And you can see how many of you used to go out to the Bay City State Park. I used to hear these stories and go out there and spend Saturdays. There was a number of people. This is what that beach looks like now. And it's been neglected because of the muck that's come in. The muck being algae because of the high phosphorus levels in the bay. We did get DNR, the director of DNR, to say, okay, we will allow 1,000 feet of beach grooming. We'll allow a boardwalk to be put in here, very precisely measured from the corners. He wanted it exactly in that spot, and that was in 2012. We've been working on that project for, well, since 2012. So, and you can tell, it's still not in. The 1,000 feet that the DNR director thought that they could have groomed out here, cleaned, turns out there isn't 1,000 feet. There's only 670 feet available. The rest of this area, this 2,350 feet, is all under a deed restriction for non-disturbance. And actually the language says the soils and the vegetation shall not be disturbed. So we're not talking just like wetlands or some type of other type of prohibition. We're talking, how do you walk on a sand beach or build a sand castle without disturbing the soils? This has locked up this property. And I have to tell you, since I first got here, right, I've heard about muck on the beach, right? And why doesn't DNR, why doesn't the county clean the beach, get DNR to clean the beach? Well, that was in 2001. Well, who knew? It was not until 2015, just a year ago in January, that we discovered that these deed restrictions are in place. DNR has never brought that up, never said, listen, we can't because of this reason. The DNR director was not even aware of it. And so that explains finally, after all of these years, why DNR has not groomed this beach. So this 2,350 feet of beachfront is preserved in a deed restriction, and this 600 feet as well is locked in a deed restriction. This is the permitted area that does allow grooming, but keeping in mind when you come in here, you've got to go through here, and then you've got to walk, you've got to pick your way probably about a half a mile just to get back to that beach. Yes?
Who put the deed restriction on there?
Well, what we discovered was that the state park manager at the time, in order to, this thing was all, I mean, obviously I've never seen it, but I've seen pictures, I've certainly seen people describe the days that they would go out there, and people, they say, I remember when we would have to get dropped off so we could save a spot, and then mom and dad would come and follow and find us. So this was all beachfront at one time, but the Army Corps of Engineers in the 1980s did start looking at wetlands differently. Nationwide, they started looking at the significant loss of wetlands. And if you recall, when I said when I first got to this area, all of the resource people that I would work with, the Department of Environmental Quality, the DNR, everybody mentioned how Saginaw Bay was one big coastal marsh. Well, the fact is, that's how the Corps of Engineers started regulating this shoreline as a coastal marsh. And in fact, when they eventually did issue this permit to the DNR parks to groom this area, they said, you're going to be destroying a coastal marsh area by grooming this sand. But in issuing this permit, what the Corps of Engineers did is they said, sure, we will give you a permit to groom this area, but one of the conditions in this permit is that you are going to place these non-disturbance preserved deed restrictions over this area and eventually over this area, and have it recorded in the deeds, on the deed, LIBOR page number, and so that's what happened. And it was one park manager that did that. There was no public notice, no public discussion. It was just, all right.
There's nothing you can do to refute it.
Well, I have to tell you that I'm still like in the recuperation stage from a meeting on Thursday that there was an open house, and DNR is looking to do another plan, a master plan for this area, and they had an open house to talk about the proposed plan. And that was one of my my handouts. It's part of your homework, but they are accepting comments on their proposed plan. And one of the things that we are, the community, the city manager, the county executive, the Chamber of Commerce, the Community Foundation, we're all working together on, is to say, listen, you don't need another plan. Back in 1994, stakeholders, the public came out and told you what we wanted, and that plan, so many elements of that plan was done, the spray park, the playground, these improvements, but all of the shoreline, the folks said, listen, we want the entire beach cleaned for swimming, and we want it restored, and we want a pier out here. Any of the shoreline projects they've not done. So the Thursday meeting was a pretty, I don't know what, Rick, you got a word for it? Frustrating, pretty dynamic meeting. But anyway, that is what we're trying to do. That is where we're at today. We are trying to tell, and in fact, we're going beyond DNR now, because they've had a plan in 1994, they had a plan in 2010, they had a plan in 2015, and now they're going to take another one up in 2016, and we're saying enough plans. You know what we want. Do this first. If you had to put these deed restrictions down there, then go back to the Corps of Engineers and start to negotiate a different way so that these can be released.
The benefit of all this, is it for the ecosystem or something?
The benefit of all this is yes.
Okay.
For all of the birds, the ones that have 49 feet of shoreline, right? They want this too, this 3,000 feet. Yeah, Ron.
Just one of the things is that somebody declared that to be marshland.
Yes.
It was never marshland. There are pictures well back in the 1800s, it was always a sand beach. So somebody declared it to be a marshland and set about trying to turn it into a marshland.
Well, and that's absolutely true, because this sand beach that, do you folks remember? Did you go out there? Did you? Okay. So this, if you've been out there recently, this is full of water, this area right along this shoreline here. This is still the sandy beach, but this area, this was actually excavated. Keeping in mind, for anybody to do anything along the shoreline, you have to have 2 permits, right? One from DEQ and one from the Corps of Engineers. And DNR they made their application, they got their permit from the DEQ, and started doing work, right? Because it takes 6-7 months to get. They got the piece of paper, they were like, hey, we're ready to go. And they started doing some of this beach grooming. Well, the Corps of Engineers came down and visited and said, hey, you don't have a permit. And they said, yeah, we do. They said, no, you got the state permit. You don't have the federal permit. So now you're going to have to do some compliance work, because you violated these rules and did work without a permit, we're going to make you take action to remediate that. So they made them dig this area up down to water. Excavate it down to water. Then they took plants from the Tobaco Marsh and planted them. They did that along here. They did it in this little spot over here. They also did it in a spot over here. All over they've tried to recreate wetlands on this shore.
Where there never were.
Where there never were.
So is that fighting against the whole project?
Well, that's what, quite honestly, we are now, we're no longer addressing our comments, our requests. You know, this is 20-something years, right? And they're still going to do a new plan, and the new plan is still, doesn't prioritize the beachfront. So the meeting on Thursday, I think the attendees there made it pretty clear. We are going to go to the governor at this point. And Rick, I don't know if you wanted that known, but the city manager, your city manager, really has taken the lead on this and has said, you know what, he wrote the first letter to the governor, said, listen, this is, you know, we've tried to work with DNR, we've been good partners, we've done things in good faith for many, many years, and we haven't, you know, seen success, so we're coming to you now. And because the city donated this property originally to the state for public recreational purposes. And when you have a preserved area restriction that says the soils and the vegetation shall not be disturbed, you can't have recreation in that area. And so that's where we're at. That's where we're going to be working. Okay, so that's your homework, okay? That's part of your homework. I have a handout here I'd like for you all to take. If you want to look at sending in a letter, they are taking comments through August 26th to both DNR and to the governor's office. I have the address, the email address on here as well. It's just basically that, you know what, it says this restriction prohibits recreation, and it doesn't comport with the original intent of the conveyance of the property from the city, and basically that these beach restrictions should be removed before any further planning. Basically, finish the job that was identified in the 1994 plan. Finish these improvements that this community took time away from their families, attended these meetings, and was very specific and very clear. They want beach improvements. Yes.
Are there signs defining the areas? So you know when you're...
No, there's no signs. And that's part of the, you know, you'll see an article in the letter, an article in the newspaper today. Mike Weiler was gracious enough to give me a copy. And it says basically that there was supposed to be a boardwalk going in here, right? That was part of the 1,000 feet deal from the 2012, from the DNR director, right? We'll let you groom 1,000 feet, and we'll let you pay for and build and maintain a boardwalk. That was tough on their part, right? They were just going to let us do that. But it's still not in, and while we were going, permits, the Corps of Engineers is not going to issue a permit in this preserved area, so it had to be squeezed into this little area. And then as part of this beach grooming, by the way, this is done through volunteer efforts. DNR really doesn't do this. This is Commissioner Krieger, it's his tractor. It's the Friends of State Park. They do the beach wellness run every year. You've probably heard of that. That raises money, and that bought that beach grooming equipment, that sand sifter. We're now on the second sand sifter. Those are $50,000, $60,000 units. And so the Friends of State Park volunteers groom this beach, and somebody went down this shoreline a little too far. The permits were ready to be issued. DEQ issued their permit, but so the DNR reported that incident to the Army Corps of Engineers, and so the Army Corps of Engineers is holding up the permit for the boardwalk. So that's, did you, yes?
How much of that preserved area is invasive species and not natural to the bay?
Well, quite honestly, you can see the difference here. It's kind of hard to see, but you see how this is all brown and this is all green through here? There's some brown through there as well. But this had been all Phragmites. All Phragmites. When the water was low, you could actually, this was dry, but you couldn't walk through it because the Phragmites was so thick. And you can't see, no, you can't see. You come around this curve and, you know, there was nothing. So this has been treated a little bit. Some of this has been treated. They have, to their credit, DNR has thinned out some of this Phragmites through here. But I will tell you, and what we're seeing now throughout the coastal area, like I was telling you, we do a lot of Phragmites. Once you get that Phragmites killed back, what's left is what's called narrow leaf cattail, and that is a new type of invasive species. It looks just like a cattail, but you can tell it's the invasive type by how aggressive it is and how dense it is. And once again, instead of those cattails that you think about, you know, from, you know, when you were a kid looking at the water and watching fish swim through there, this is not that. This is, again, from a distance, it looks like a normal cattail, but very, very dense. And when any plant, those invasives, that's a key indicator of an invasive species by how aggressive it is and its growth pattern. So they have done a better job, but what's happened, you know, this coming through here now, when you drive down here, you can kind of see the bay peeking through here a little bit, but willows, right? Willows are now taking up through here, bushy willows. And so, of course, those are natural, so those aren't going to be treated, those aren't going to be cut, so they want to leave that in there.
Are any of those subjected to winter kill with the ice in the snow?
They haven't been, but 2 years ago, when the water came up, it has killed back some of those shrubs. Yes, in the back.
Two questions, actually. Who controls the sewage discharge of the septic systems on the rest of the shoreline?
Ooh, you just poked at a sore spot for me, because and I say why it's a sore spot is because so much improvement has gone on at the city with their public wastewater treatment plant. Those investments, they've got top-notch professionals there that are sampling 24 hours a day, as well as in Saginaw. But you're right. Where does the septic systems discharge? You know, typically they're supposed to go, you know, be absorbed into the ground, and so not all septic systems are contributing to bacteria, but there certainly are some that are around drainage areas that do contribute to bacteria, and that would be our health department. So I shouldn't be saying that, but that would be our health department, okay? Everybody heard that? So if you don't like that, you need to be asking the health department why they're not doing something.
Second question, this is just a small part of the Great Lakes shoreline.
Right.
Having grown up on the Great Lakes, it strikes a real bell with me and public access to this asset. Is this typical of the rest of the Great Lakes?
You mean the Phragmites?
No, what's going on here in terms of private access?
Well,
control of the public?
To some extent, the whole national level of awareness and protection of wetlands is going on. But as far as this shoreline and what they're doing here, the Federal Army Corps of Engineers and our DEQ and the DNR, no, this is highly, highly unusual. Someone even mentioned to me the other day about, she recalled someone trying to fill in the low spots in their backyard in Banker Township. I don't know if you remember that article. And one of the DEQ people came out and said, no, you can't do that, because she wanted to fill it in for her kids to have some area to play. They said, those are wetlands, you can't do that. So no, this is clearly targeted in Michigan, but I'm going to tell you, mostly on the east side of the state and primarily in the Saginaw Bay area. You will not, in fact, the Army Corps of Engineers right now has a public comment period that just is closing. They allow beach grooming. Most places don't even need a permit to do the beach grooming you saw, like the Sanibel Islands. That's just, you have a beach, you maintain it. It's like you have a lawn, you mow it, right? No, now they're saying everywhere but Michigan. So they're having a Michigan exception. Rick, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of points. We were talking about the septic systems. I've been in 6 states, and I will tell you that this county and this region is way behind what other places are doing as far as dealing with septic systems. The last state I was in, they had a very detailed requirement that if a septic system failed, there were certain things that they had to take care of. And as soon as public sewage became available, they had to connect to it. They had no choice, and it didn't matter how much money it cost, they had to connect to it. This is what other places are doing, and we really need to look at those types of things. Now, one of the issues that we have is everybody wants to be able to live outside the cities and have 3 or 4 or 5 acres of land, but there are costs to that. And a lot of times those costs get forgotten until it's time to pay the bill. But as far as the city goes, you know, we don't, that's not in our city. So we normally would not even take a position on this. We took a position on it because it was owned by the city. And the city transferred that property over. And it's clear as part of that transfer back in 1922 that there were some understandings with the state and that it was going to continue to be recreational area. It was going to continue to take on the tenor that it had at that time, which included, I would put forth, the beach. So you have that issue, and that's why the city has taken a strong position in working with the county on it. It's also an economic issue from the city standpoint. Obviously, having this facility there is great as far as the campers and all, but a beach would actually significantly help the area as far as bringing more people into not only our city but also the county. Third point is that I'm very, very disturbed that 20 years ago that all this Mickey Mousing went on, and that a park manager who would not have the authority to sign off on anything, given the way the state works. That's like in my operation, a city planner signing off on a deed restriction without having the city manager or the commission approve it. You can't do that. It certainly can be done because you just go in and you take the deed in and get it recorded, and that's what happened. But it didn't follow the proper procedures.
Right.
That person did not have the authority to do that. Also, the public process at that time, even though it's much more aggressive now, there still was a public process back 20 years ago.
Yes, there was.
And that wasn't followed either. So there's a whole lot, there's a lot of stuff here, and as I told Laura, the governor really needs to look into this because he's got a mess of a whole lot of stuff where people did stuff behind the scenes. In some cases, I think, after looking at it preliminarily, that some illegal things actually went on. That they overstepped their authorities, and they need to correct it. It can be corrected. There was a gentleman at the meeting Thursday night, I don't know who he was, seemed to be pretty well educated on this issue, and he was making the comment that the Corps' requirement for the deed restrictions expired after 20 years. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. But if it is true, well, the 20 years has gone by. So you've got a situation here, in my opinion, I've dealt with this in other places. You've got some strongly willed, and environmentalists are good people. I believe in taking care of in the wetlands and all. But you have some people that are far out here. I think that's what you have here. And that's what you had 20 years ago. You had certain people that were so committed to the core of restoring that they threw away the other piece of it, and that was the public process and the input of you people and others that live here. That's what was missing, and that's really what has to be corrected. I've dealt with the Army Corps of Engineers. Most of the time, they're pretty reasonable people to sit down and talk to. I think that, from the city standpoint, we'll work with the county. The county's the lead agency because it's in the county, it's not in the city. But I think that perhaps we should get our congressional delegation from this area, our senators, and actually coordinate a meeting with the Corps if we can't successfully deal with the state people, because Laura sent out it's funny that she sent this out, because my wife and I have a house in New York, which is right off of the lake, and she just happened to send an Army Corps of Engineers notice about a $8 or $9 million beach that was being put in. Well, that's a quarter of a mile from where our house is. So it's ironic that they're going to put in, and this is an area in New York that is been taken care of. There's a huge area for wetlands and for birds and everything else, very similar to what you have here. But they've come up with a way of putting a break wall in, protect the beach area, and they're going to spend a whole lot of federal dollars actually building a beach where there isn't a beach. So,
wow, that is something, Rick. Yeah, I didn't realize that was in your back door, but it was.
It's an increase in the value of our house too. So that's
there you go. The meeting was Thursday. I was back at work on Friday, and that notice just popped up. Here we're wrestling with the DNR, to deal with this, to address this after 20-something years, to let us have the 5,000 feet of beach. The birds have 48 miles. Let us have 5,000 feet. And and then the next day, this notice came up that the Army Corps of Engineers is going to be building a beach. They're going to almost $8 million of beachfront. That's funny that's in your backyard. That's funny. So you're the common denominator. So you're going to have to really step it up here.
I was very excited about it because that was the announcement. So people hadn't even heard in New York. They hadn't heard it. That just came out. So she's very, very pleased with that.
Good. All right. Any other questions on this? I'm going to just kind of finish up on just some of these. This is a boardwalk, right? We see this all the time. Anybody's gone to South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina has it. They have these wetland, the dunes, even on the west side of Michigan. You put a boardwalk through that, and this is very, very minimal impact. Critters can run under this thing, and you get to the other side. That's all we wanted. We weren't asking for the moon. We weren't asking for like a 7-Eleven or a strip mall to be built down here. I mean, but you would have heard the birders on Thursday. You would have thought that's what happened. So this is just an example of what we had envisioned that would go in at the state park that apparently as of today we still don't have a permit for. But just quickly, I don't know if you remember Jeff Cart, the reporter for the Bay City Times. This is his dad, and he bet Jeff that he could walk to the water, and Jeff said, no, I don't think so. And this is out at State Park, and he came out without his shoe, and he's got his dollar for Jeff because he's lost the bet. Of course, and these are researchers. You can see this muck, right? I mean, it's just horrendous. This is the 2015 plan that was done. In fact, Bay County funded half of that, 50% of that document, in order to focus DNR on actions that could be taken at the lakefront and the beach. You can see the folks who participated, very much interested. So again, I don't know who asked, you said, is this unusual or unique to Michigan? You bet, and in particular to this area. And so this is what is being called, this is that brown spot I told you about on that beach at the end of State Park Drive. This is what it was 30, 40 years ago. Cars on the beach, sand, children playing, crime, right? It's terrible to have that. People in the water. That's what they're regulating as a wetland. Now, again, very quickly, and I'll wrap up here, but this is that spot I was talking about. This is that area that the slide previous to is right here at this point. Again, we're looking at possibly, if we were going to be putting in a pier, it might DNR for fishing, the fishing part of DNR, who are more normal people, they say to be legitimately a fishing pier, it has to terminate in at least 6 feet of water. So to make it legitimate. Now, and reasonable for fishing. Now, keeping in mind, you know, the water fluctuates, right? I mean, significantly to some extent. So it's not going to be a hard and fast number, but this was done. This was actually done in 2014, prior to the water flooding in October of 14. But so we've estimated to get 6 feet of water at that time during low water, it's going to be about an 800-foot long pier. Would you guys use an 800-foot long pier? Would you ever walk on it? I mean, you can. This is for, again, shore-based fishing. Our vision is to take this property, not, you know, use it, get it from DNR, clean it up, put in a pier with benches, a pier with fishing area down here, you know, a railing around it, those spotting scopes, place you can sit down there and look at the bay, right? Points of inspiration. How many visual points of inspiration do we really have in Bay County? Where we, you know, I like to say you can sit down here and look into tomorrow, right? The sun's gonna come up tomorrow. I've always been like a sunset side person, right? I always wanted to see the sunset and the beautiful red sunset. And it's funny, being here in Bay County, what I've found, the sunrise side, is that, you know what? Sunrises, they're full of hope and promise, right? The sunset, it's the end of the day, things are ending, settling down. You know what? I don't want to see sunsets so much anymore. I like these sunrises, looking, you know, so a scenic point, but also fishing, because we can, there's actually more funding available, grant funding, if we make it a fishing pier. Clean this area up, have an area where you can actually drive in, and for folks like my mom who was in a wheelchair, who loved the water, be able to drive in here, not get out of the car, not get out of the van, not get out of your wheelchair, but to just be able to sit here and look at the water, right? Bay County, Saginaw Bay, our Great Lakes shoreline, what's the harm in that? So, and then utilize these buildings, repurpose them. You know, someone had talked about putting a restaurant on the top floor of this building. And so, why not? You know, I mean, there's all sorts of things. When you look at there, you've heard of Pure Michigan. There's a website called Pier Michigan, like Fishing Pier Michigan. When you look at that, it has a little dots on all the fishing piers around the state. On the west side of the state, you have to zoom in to be able to see these dots, because they're like almost piled on top of each other. There's so many of them. Here, there's just, it just doesn't exist. So these are the next steps. The costs that DNR said, you know, we'll just have to do a marketing analysis, cost benefit analysis, preliminary design. This is actually a site in Spain. But, you know, we have, the other natural resource we have here is wind. Why not kite surfing, have some surfboarding, paddle boards. This is, you know, how, you know, back in the whatever 30s and 40s, you know, we have potential. And then this is the Oscoda Pier. And this is the last slide I have. This was actually, so this is in Saginaw. Well, sorry, this is right at that board. I thought it was in Saginaw Bay. It's just north of where it's now the outer, beyond the outer Saginaw Bay. So this is actually Lake Huron, but just outside of the outer Saginaw Bay. Oscoda Township. This is relatively new. It was built probably about 4 years ago. I've talked to their community development director. She said, first of all, very little maintenance. They have a maintenance fund set up, haven't used it yet after 4 years. These round piles, it doesn't have that romantic look of some of these old piers around that you'll see, you know, in the old historical Bay City, the wooden structure. But this will protect the ice that we get, right? This will protect that structure from the ice, shifting that scour that comes in, shallow area. And she said, there are weddings here. There are routinely, sometimes 2 or 3 in a weekend. There are, you know, senior photos that are taken. There are all sorts of things that, and look at the people. My gosh, enjoying the shoreline. So anyway, that is my presentation. I'm going to take questions, but just for the last homework, I really would like for you to at least consider picking up this handout to possibly write a letter to the governor saying, hey, we want our shoreline back. But also I wanted to ask if any of you have old photos of this beachfront area, you know, the Paraleon Beach, State Park. If any of you, you know, there's no time frame for this, but if as you go through your old photos, if you do come across something, Ron, you know, we don't need to keep them. We would just make a very good copy of them and get them back to you. But I have to tell you, even during the course of this work, when we were working with DNR, we had the directors down there saying, we want this shoreline, because people remember this, that it was a beach. The one director, who I won't name, who isn't there anymore, threw his head back and laughed. He said he did not believe that this was a white, sandy shoreline. He laughed at these commissioners who are sharing their stories. And so anyway, the more photos we can have to show people, in fact, that it was a popular recreation site, the better off we'd be. So anyway, that's the end of my presentation. And I just, again, this is what it could be, and I'm thinking, why not here, right? Why not? So that's it. So I'll take questions. Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right. Yeah, Ron. Comment.
A gentleman asked about the septic fields and stuff like that. I lived in Gratiot County for a number of years, which all drains out the river here. And a lot of the old farms there have a septic tank with no field. All they did was run a tile from the tank itself into the ditch.
Unbelievable.
And so all those ditches are running into out there the Pine River, which all ends up coming out the Saginaw River. So we've got a bunch of other counties involved, because there's like 22 counties that come
in our
Saginaw
watershed.
River.
Yes.
And we only have control over 3 or 4.
Right. Yes.
I live out at the beach, and when I was a kid on the Kakawin River, and somebody would flush their toilet in the house, you would see it run out into the river.
Well, let me just tell you, I have to say, just you live here, so you couldn't escape the fact that we just had a primary election. I will say our current county executive, Tom Hickner, has been very, very supportive for water quality. He, in fact, created my department to work on Saginaw Bay and economic development related issues. Tom Hickner has been very supportive from the very beginning for water quality, and has allowed me to do a lot of the work that I've done. However, I will say too now, we are going to have a new county executive coming in. And quite honestly, he's going to want to know what the priorities are from the community, right? So septic systems going into this bay would be a really nice thing to have, you know, clarify, you know, if that's your priority, this is an opportunity to have that, you know, identified as a top priority.
There's one other way you could take care of the problem. Do what Chicago did in the 1890s. They didn't want to soil their beaches from their sewers, so they reversed the flow of the Chicago River and sent their sewage down the Mississippi, so that the Lake Michigan shoreline would be nice and clean.
Well, but you know, and so, right, but the problem is, it's all the drains, the agricultural drains, and so anyway, there are things we can do. We are the only county in the state that has developed a revolving septic loan fund, and that is for, and that was raised with private foundation money that was raised in order to replace septic systems that the health department discovered that were actually impacting, you know, flowing into surface water. That means even drains. Here we have these big drains in this area full of water that go into the Saginaw Bay. It is a loan. It's not a giveaway money, and it's money of last resort. So if people, you know, should be taking care of their own wastewater plant on their own house. But if for whatever reason they are unable to do that, they can't get funding, any alternative source, we have funding available. We have developed to make a loan, not to them, but we will put a lien on the house for the cost of that septic system, and we will pay the contractor and pay for the an approved system to go in. And so we're the only county in the state that has that. But again, that's because of this work, you know, the concern. We know how well the city sewer system is now working. We know how clean it is. We've looked at that data. It is, and I have to tell you, whenever, you'll still hear about beach closings. This last time was down at Wenona Park by the trailer park. Does anybody have an idea? Because they've done a lot of work down there. What's on that shoreline? A lot of it down on the shoreline down there, seagulls and geese. And so that's really, that never made it into the article, but because that beach has not been groomed, because it's been forgotten, because it hasn't been maintained, geese love it, right? They can sit there all day long. And they do, and that's what happens. Their waste, you know what that's like, trying to step through goose droppings, and it goes out into the water, and that's why that beach in particular, why it's been closed. But so anyway, that's the goal, is to stop those beach closings, stop the bacteria. We know the city is doing a good job. Now we're moving into septic systems, and so the more you can say, hey, this is important to us, we want to see some action on that, the better off we'll all be. Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much. Don't forget your homework. Don't forget to take this.